If you want to go to study overseas, there are so many things you need to consider because there are so many regulations when it comes to the international students or students from one country studying in another country. In this video, I want to explain what are the important issues or things to consider or to pay attention as international student or when you want to become international student in a particular country. Are these proper guidance for you? Are these only things you need to pay attention or not? Welcome everyone. My name is Ernest Boniface Makulilo EBM and I welcome you to the EBM Scholars. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, don't forget, you know what to do. Just click the button to subscribe, notification, everything on the youtube.com/EBM Scholars. So, what are the important things you need to consider as an international student? Before I go to those particular areas or things you need to consider, you have to know that international students have different types of regulations compared to the students or citizens of that particular country. And in some areas or in some countries, there are even more differences. So you need to know just overall these differences of the regulations so that when you get opportunity to have 2 or 3 schools or 2 or 3 countries to choose from, you can be able to look into these particular things and to make the decision. Number 1 to consider is obviously the cost of studies. I'm saying the costs of studies, and who is going to finance those studies will be able to factor to make the decision. Are you going to pay for your own studies? And in this case, we call self-financing student. Or you are going as international student who has got the full funded scholarship program or a certain percentage of scholarship. So, that will be able to pay attention. So if you are coming as full financing yourself, there are countries are not very good because the cost of studying in those countries is higher than other countries. For instance, you want to study master's or PhD in the United States and you pay on your own, that's a lot of money. Per year will be minimum 25,000. That is tuition fees and living expenses. That is the cheapest university you'll be able to get. But if you go to Norway or any other Scandinavian countries or even German, you can study for free, no tuition, no fees. You can be able just to use the 12,000 for the cost of living. So number 1, you have to look like the financing part. Are you self-financing or you go to scholarship? If you go to full funded scholarship, that's a full ride. It is easier decision to make it like, okay, I'm going to this country because I got full funded. So that's number 1 to consider. Number 2, you have to consider the regulations regarding to the work authorizations as international student. Remember, whatever country you are going to study, as an international student, you are going to be full-time student. And if you're full-time student, working is supposed to be part-time. So how many hours are you allowed to work? That's number 1. And when we're talking about work authorization, some people are married. Some people go with their spouse. There are some people go with their children. Are you allowed to get extra funding on that particular situation? Are you allowed to work? In one of the videos I was talking about Commonwealth shared scholarship. In that scholarship, if you are single parent or divorced or widowed and you have a child, if you go with one child, you get almost like 490 something pounds extra. And the second child, you get about 260 pounds. As long as the children are under the age of 16. So some of the programs as a scholarship, you are allowed to get extra funding if you go with your particular, maybe dependent, either is a child or is a spouse. But in most cases, for instance, in the United States as a country, you are not allowed to work if I bring my spouse, if I bring my children, are not allowed to work. They're dependent. I have to prove if I get a scholarship, most of the scholarship don't pay for the dependents, and they are not going to be given a work permit. But if you go to Canada, if I'm married, I'll be allowed to work 20 hours per week, but my spouse will be allowed to work full time, 40 hours a week. But in the US, a spouse is not allowed to work even 1 hour. So you need to know the work authorization thing. In some countries, for instance, the United States, you are allowed to work only on campus. But if you go, for instance, some countries in Europe, even in Canada, you are allowed to work, but you can work even off campus. So the regulations, even for the work authorization, is very, very important while you are studying to make the decision as international student. Still on the topic of work authorization, after studies, most of the countries, they give the opportunity to go have work experience. In the United States, we call the optional practical training, OPT. You are allowed to work 1 year in the United States. For those people who are in the science and engineering STEM, they are going to 1 year and a half, 18 months. In July 2021, in United Kingdom, they have passed the new regulations. Now is automatic. You will be allowed, if you do master's degree, you are allowed to be given 2 years of work permit. It used to be you must get a job first, and can't with the job is a guarantee, then you can get a work permit. But now you'll be allowed to apply work permit even if you don't have the job after your studies. And for masters, you get 2 years. If you have PhD, you get 3 years. In Canada, it's different. They call post studies work permit. If your studies is 2 years, you are going to be given 2 years of work permit. If your studies is 3 years, you're going to have 3 years of work permit. So if you do PhD for 4 years, you're going to have 4 years of work permit. So the work permit is determined by the length of your studies. So when you are going to choose the country, let's say you go to United States and Canada. Obviously, as international student, I would suggest you to go to Canada, because if you are married, your spouse will be working full time. And within 2 years, you will be allowed to apply for permanent resident. In the US, your spouse doesn't work, and you yourself will be limited to work on campus for 20 hours per week. But after finishing, you are going to get 1 year. Over there, you get 2 to 3, 4 years, depending on the length of your studies. And in Canada, you have other pathways, easier ways to become permanent resident if you go as a student. So you need to look like all those kind of areas. My plan, am I planning to stay in that particular country for the rest of my life, or in a long term in that particular country? If that is the goal, then it is good to consider the laws of the country and the prioritization of people to be given work permit and permanent resident after their studies. In other words, what are the opportunities are available upon graduating with your studies? So international students is not just being excited when you get the visa, and then you get surprised, oh, I didn't know that this country doesn't have the regulations that I cannot work after studies. Sometimes you have to consider another point. You have to consider the language. Let's say you're going to study in German. You're going to study in Sweden. You're going to study in Netherlands. Yes, your master's degree, your PhD is in English language. But do you plan to stay in that particular country after studies? If that is the goal, obviously you have to plan from the beginning to study the language, because if you're studying social work, how are you going to work in that particular country and support the economy of that country without knowing that language? So, if you speak English and you are already in Britain, you are in United Kingdom, overall United Kingdom, or you are in Canada, majority is part of the English, or you are in the United States, or in Australia or New Zealand, Obviously, we don't need to worry about the English part or the language after studies. What will that be to transitioning to the practical life of career in that particular country? So, all those are the things you need to consider. International student is not just going to study. It's just to look into all those areas. Some people think about other factors. I want to go to that particular country. Does that country and that particular university, are they good in the program I want to go to study? If you want to study engineering, should I go to study engineering in Finland versus engineering in the United States? Should I go to study law at Harvard or law at UCLA? You got both law to law schools. So you need to consider all those factors as international student. There are countries, but there are states, there are specific universities. There are so many things you need to consider as international student. But the biggest of all usually comes to the finance. As I've been talking, is my first point. Are you going to pay for your own, or you are looking for scholarships? On my YouTube, there is a particular playlist with education scholarship opportunities. Just go and check out those videos. So many videos I've been talking about the steps to apply, if you are going to pay for your own, and all other things you need to know about international students and the scholarship opportunities available for you.